Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the individual chapter connects to the rest of the manga as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the current chapter that we are discussing. This is chapter 125, Insanity and Genius. This glove, Sonrei Shuto, has the power to diffuse reishi at a high level. It holds so much power that most Quincy's couldn't even produce the bow. But if you can produce the bow and maintain it for 7 days and 7 nights, you'll reach the peak of your Quincy powers. But once you do that, you can never take the glove off again, because your reishi collecting power will be beyond what a Quincy can control. The flame it produces would affect you as well. If you take off the glove, you'll momentarily gain immense power, but your Quincy powers will all be lost. Bleach, chapter 125, Insanity and Genius. What is that? Such spiritual pressure! I've never seen anything like it. Never! Is he absorbing the buildings? The buildings in the Soul Society are all made of reishi. He's breaking the bonds holding them together and absorbing the reishi. He's preventing the reishi from bonding, forcing them to become part of his strength. The reishi is being torn apart. He's bending them to his will. You're exceeding your human limits, boy. It's too fast. At the speed, I can't dodge it. Beg for mercy, and never appear in front of me again. Do that, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and I'll send a bolt that's 3 times stronger. Don't push your luck, boy! You stupid Quincy. Very well. Then I'll return the favor. Bon Guy. What? Bon? What? Gonjiki Ashisogi Jizo. Divine leg-cutting Jizo. A Jizo is a protector of people and the souls of deceased children. Now, your doom is sealed. The Konjiki Ashisogi Jizo sprays lethal poison made from my blood for a 100-mile radius. It won't hurt me, of course. But he'll die. Sorry. You would never make a fit research subject. I won't be the one to die. I'll shoot you before you can spray the fatal dose. Yeah! Oh, please, be my guest! August 10th, sunny. When Ichigo left, he said he was going on a trip for a month, but why do I have to take care of his family? It's not like I care what happens to them. I said those words and kicked a pebble to the distant galaxy. That's when I sensed someone's burning stare. And that is it for chapter 125. Insanity and Genius, I think. I think that's the title of this one, if I do recall. Let me get back to the beginning of this chapter, and we can talk about the art, the narrative, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. Back at the beginning here. So, Insanity and Genius, chapter title, I think, kind of clearly refers to Mayuri and Uryu. But which is which? Oh! I think the obvious takeaway, right, is that Mayuri is supposed to be the one that we interpret as insane, and Ishida the one as a genius, right? Though certainly Mayuri could be the one interpreted as a genius for having accomplished Bankai, which seems like a pretty huge accomplishment as far as Soul Reapers are gone. But also, Mayuri has done more than just accomplish Bankai. He has all these different inventions. He's perhaps a genius, even if it is a twisted one at that. Whereas you could certainly argue that Uryu giving up all of his power, giving up his Quincy powers entirely, even using the Sanray glove, might be a form of insanity, right? That he's willing to give all this away for this power, and then he gives up all of this power just whenever he's facing Miri. I mean, doesn't he want to save Rukia? You know, like it really at this moment, you really see that Uryu kind of goes overboard. I think that he's kind of goaded into this by Mayuri, really. To try to get revenge for his grandfather, to try to kind of feel as though his justice and that his worldview is meted out, really. But yeah, as far as the larger goal of saving Rukia goes, I don't see how losing all of his powers really helps him accomplish that. He should have just fled as well from Mayuri, though, you know, maybe he couldn't. Maybe he saw that it was a sort of situation where he and Orihime couldn't get out, and that he had to shut down Mayuri here and now. Even so, it's the sort of thing where it's like, you know, it's hard to kind of see him sacrificing his power for you know like a good reason. Um, like, whew, yeah, maybe Mayuri does seem like a credible enough threat. It's just, you know, we just had this kind of large bombastic battle with Zaraki Kenpachi, and Ichigo didn't have to sacrifice all of his power. In fact, he became more powerful to meet the Captain at his own strength, and so it seems particularly kind of adverse to their scenario of saving Rukia that Ishida would give up this power, right? Bad move, one might say. But we talked before about the kind of fragility of power in the previous video, and certainly I think there's this idea of these shortcuts to power. And we're starting to see that a lot here, right? That there are these very dangerous sort of shortcuts to power that often come at risk to your life. I mean, this is a shonen trope, right? The idea that, you know, as you skirt death, as you sort of risk your life, you can gain a lot of power very quickly, but it's, you know, no sane person would kind of take that route, right? Again, coming back to insanity and genius, of course. Um, so we kind of talk about the Sanray glove, the Sanray Shuto, at the beginning of this chapter. We get this whole kind of breakdown of exactly how it works, right? That it's the glove allows you to diffuse the reishi at a really high level. It kind of, you know, sort of makes your reishi diffusion tick up to the highest kind of level that it can be, but at that point you kind of have to keep the glove on as a limiter, or else, you know, you'll basically do too much harm to yourself. It'll be beyond what you can control. Um, and seeing as spiritual particles make up, you know, souls and stuff, uh, you could just make yourself into a horrible black hole of absorbing all the spiritual particles around you, and nobody wants that, right? Seems like a bad time, as we saw with Ichigo and Uryu before. whenever Uryu was trying to kind of absorb the reishi that Ichigo was building inside of him and shoot it out. We saw how it literally tore Ishida's hand and arm apart, right? And think of that, but just constantly, right? You wouldn't survive it, is the idea, right? Would be a bad time, certainly. Nevertheless, the idea is that yes, if you do remove the glove, then you will have a burst of power, right? Immense power, but then you lose your powers forever. Now, I do want to say about this page, like while I do think the Samurai Glove is kind of an interesting thing, and it certainly presents a sort of dilemma for Uryu, where he feels as though he can't overcome this opponent without tapping into this power and kind of giving up his Quincy power even. And this is something that he was prepared to do, certainly. Whenever he put on the Samurai Glove for the first time, he was really dedicating himself to hitting the max of his power, right? Getting as powerful as possible. And it's interesting that like Ishida has to take such a strain, like you would even think perhaps forbidden kind of path to power. I do believe in the previous chapter that Soken had mentioned by the time that Uryu actually opens this box, perhaps he'll find something that he believes he should protect. And so maybe he's seeing that, he's protecting Uryu or Hime, or maybe he's protecting, all the others, or at the very least he's found an opponent that is worth sacrificing his power to rid the world of. So that all makes sense. That said, I absolutely can't stand this page. And I'll show you why. Look at what we get on this page. Like, it is how many text boxes? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 text boxes and 4 panels. Like the real estate of the page is overwhelmed by dialogue. We don't need this told to us. We've been shown all this. We've been told all the important parts of this. We're about to be shown how he absorbs the reishi from everything. We're about to be shown the immense power that he gains. And we can just be shown him losing that power afterwards. In fact, it makes for an even more dramatic moment were he to like do all this and you'd be like, oh crap, you could do that all along, and then you realize the cost afterwards, right? So I urge any writer to kind of like learn from this, right? Learn that you don't need to front end all this explanation of how a power works. You can just show your reader, and generally your readers are going to be smart enough to pick up on this. Now, there's a few reasons why I think Kubo's making it really explicit. I think he wants the average reader who might be like 12 years old or 14 or whatever. The target audience is young boys. Keep that in mind. He wants everyone reading this to understand what's happening here. So Kubo certainly can do subtle, and there are definitely times whenever he does do quite subtle kind of I guess I was going to say explanations. Like examples of how a power gets used are how like something about a character is shown in kind of a subtle way. There's certainly, and like he's written about how like he that's how he tends to think about the writing process, is he tries to think about what the average reader would pick up from what he wrote and what he drew, and how much he can kind of hide something versus how explicit he should make it. Now, I don't always agree with exactly how explicit he makes certain things, but certainly whenever I'm reading this page, I read it as Kubo really wanted to make it explicit, so every reader understood Uryu is going to gain a lot of power from this, and then also lose his powers forever, that it's going to come at this great cost, and Uryu knows this going in, just like we know it going in. I don't think it's necessary narratively. I think it loses a lot of its punch to be told to us at this point twice in a row. It's sort of like it's belaboring the point. But the real reason that I hate this page, the real reason I can't stand this page, I'm not going to say hate it, but it's my least favorite page in Bleach, probably so far in the entirety of the manga. And it's because of this just immense amount of text, not really anything that evokes that text. So it's just exposition about how the Samurai glove works. We don't, we get a nice expression from Mayuri at the very bottom as he's sort of reacting to this, but otherwise we see the Samurai glove in its box, we see Uryu's feet, and that's it. It's not very compelling imagery, and again, manga for me works best whenever it's a visual medium. Yes, the text is coupled with those visuals to help to tell a narrative. It's not, purely visual, but there should be a balance there. And this, at this point, is more like a book. This is like an illuminated light novel more than it is a page of manga at this point, which is, yeah, it's just straight up like it ceases to be manga in form for me at this point. It kind of takes me out of it, like I can't stand whenever manga quickly becomes like, well, let me tell you everything. It's like, just show me. You literally can just draw it, right? Like I could pick it up. But again, like I said, there's places for subtlety and there's places for being very explicit, and I think Kubo really wanted, especially with this chapter and everything that he ends up doing in this chapter, he wanted to be incredibly explicit up front. And luckily, we don't have to get as much of this dialogue moving forward. There is a bit from Mayuri as he's realizing what's going on. I think we could have just gotten that for the rest of the chapter and been fine with it. Of course, we get the consequences of this, that all of his Quincy powers will be lost. And I do like this page where we see Uryu from perhaps Mayuri's point of view. We see this massive wing of Reishi, and then we get this, very dramatic cut into Uryu meeting Mayuri's eyes, and just like the killing intent that is on Uryu's face. Pretty cool shading. Could be a little cleaner in places, but overall works really well. Yeah, it's good stuff. We get, of course, our chapter cover, and we get to see Uryu in his entire kind of transformed outfit. Again, pretty cool. I certainly like the whole kind of, I guess there's a asymmetry there that I really enjoy. The patterning's neat. The design of the bow has changed, which is, something that, like, it's minor, but I do appreciate it. He's got this kind of like half glove on his other hand that doesn't really quite go all the way to the just like a little bit past his knuckles. But all in all, I think it's meant to be kind of very evocative of an archer's outfit, and especially with the hakama, is meant to kind of evoke the idea of a perhaps even a Japanese archer, traditionally. So it's neat that it has that element and it also works in the Quincy crosses in a way. All in all, I really do like this design. I think it's pretty cool, and certainly gives you the sense of like, oh man, he's kind of transformed, and this bow is, taken this form that his whole, like all of his clothes have even changed, right? Or at least a majority of them. Of course, Mayuri's never seen this before, and so he's kind of freaking out at something that he hadn't accounted for, right? And I do love like the genuine kind of almost terror on display here as he sort of walks back and, expresses, and we see here this bit of the reishi from the building being pulled away. Mayuri noticing that, and I really love that close up of his eye that we get there. It's good stuff. His reaction as we see the various parts of the building around Uryu being sucked into his wing. Cool detail here is that you get the Quincy 5-pointed cross on his back. I guess Quincy star, Quincy. It's usually referred to as the Quincy cross, right? So it's neat that is featured prominently on Uryu's back. Just cool that that's worked into the design, and that this wing really that absorbs all of this reishi. This is sort of like the Sanrei glove, doing its thing, right? Kind of being a massive reishi sort of manipulator. Here, of course, Mayuri realizes like, oh, he's absorbing the buildings. Everything's made of reishi. What's kind of neat is like, yeah, everything's made of reishi, including your body, which I think that's sort of the conclusion that um, Kubo Type doesn't have stated explicitly. But I feel like this thing could just literally evaporate you and turn you and your soul into an arrow if it wanted. So it's a very dangerous weapon, right? Since we're in Soul Society, literally everything's been made of reishi. Even your kanpaku is reishi, right? So yeah, the reishi being torn apart, this last panel being completely blank. Again, I wish there was something there. Um, you know, I think we get kind of cool visuals of everything kind of breaking down, being absorbed into the wing, it growing larger and larger. I do wish there was like a little bit more on display besides like a few, panels and parts of walls being torn up. I wish we got to see a little bit more of the environment, kind of dynamically torn into the swing. But fantastic expression from Mayuri. Nevertheless, he rightfully expresses that Uryu is exceeding his limits. And it's kind of interesting. We talked about, again, the fragility of power. And this line immediately reminds me of the interaction that we had with Chad, right? Back whenever he fought Kyoraku Shunsui. And Shunsui was like, well, there's certain moves that, whenever you do them, you're definitely, you shouldn't be able to. And so you're shortening your lifespan by doing them. You're kind of exceeding your human limits, right? And so I think here Mayuri is expressing that as well. That certainly Uryu is exceeding his limits. Uryu doesn't really care though. I like that he just flips up his hand. We get another great reaction shot from Mayuri going into the next page, and then we have this huge scope out to the page wide sort of absorption of all the reishi from different points into making this arrow. It's a very cool arrow, and again, the lift of Uryu's eye, Mayuri realizing that he's about to be attacked, jumping back to kind of make distance. We get that initial shot, and Mayuri realizes that it's too quick for him to dodge. And yeah, Uryu's already above him, firing a second arrow, right? So very, very kind of cool sequence. And this is one that we technically saw like Uryu doing this before, so it's neat to see this heightened to the point that Uryu's doing this quicker than Mayuri, because I believe this is the same sort of technique. They like shot, and then as it comes at you, quickly kind of like maneuver around and get another shot off on them while they dodge the first. That's something that we saw with Uryu at the beginning of this fight, so it's cool to see how him using the Samurai glove in this way allows him to kind of like like do that quicker, right? To be able to overcome Mayuri, right? We see him unable to before, and now he's able to. It's nice. I like that progression. I also really like the patterning that the outfit that he has on the line work in it. It kind of reminds me of like cybernetics, or like the way in which in like a microchip the different little, I guess, was that silicon? The different ways like a microchip would look, right, with the little lines in it, right, of whatever filament or whatever is in there. It certainly makes me think of reishi being kind of patterned and made to move in these ways. At least that's what it evokes for me. And I wonder if that was intentional or if that's just like a personal reading that I'm getting from it. Nevertheless, it's really cool. I like that this arrow like shoots so hard that like this ring kind of claps out from it, sort of like bursting through the sonic barrier or something. It's really cool way of showing like the speed of the attack. It gives it a lot of impact. Um, Interesting here that Aryu says, beg for mercy, never appear in front of me again, and I'll let you live. Weird that you would give up your powers just to let a monster like Mayuri live. But I do love that we see kind of Mayuri like in flames, sort of smoking, clutching the ground. We see the side of his Zenpakuto there. And he says, or Ryu, of course, says that he can make a bolt that's 3 times stronger, which certainly with all the ratio that he's gathered, he can. Now, I do want to go back a bit, because there was something that was kind of throwing me for a loop at the end of the last chapter, right? Where Mayuri removes something from his ear, and he has this other kind of device in hand. And I don't know that we ever see it again. Let's see. Yeah, he hops back. You can see that he's got his Zenpakuto in his right hand, but I don't know that you can tell that he has anything in his left hand. Whatever the device is, whatever it is that he pulled out of his ear, like the guts that kind of solidified into something. Certainly not there, not here, not really there either. He's shot here. There we only see his Zanpakuto. Same thing again. Yeah. And then we just see him, immensely wounded. So at this point, he's missing his entire right arm, right? So yeah, whatever Mayuri was planning to do, whatever he pulled out of his ear, whatever kind of contraption that was, I guess we don't get to find out. I do really love the ways that we see Mayuri losing his composure. He was bragging up and so confident before, but we see him spilling blood here and missing an entire arm, and we do get our first Bankai reveal. So Bankai had been mentioned earlier, and technically the first time in which we saw the mention of the symbol that is associated with Bankai was way back with Tessai, whenever he uses one of the sealing techniques for Ichigo. I believe that one of the stone, like the one that drops like the big weight into the shattered shaft, is like something Bon something 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 something. So this is using the same character for Bankai. So it's kind of a neat connection that's there. But it's this kind of second phase release, right? This version of their sword, and it's certainly something that we've been hyping up already with Yorichi. And so, interestingly enough, of course, Mayuri will be our first character to reveal their Bankai, and we get this sort of odious bubbling thing. We get to see the silhouette of it. We get to see these arms shoot out and grab, like shatter and grab at the walls. Ryu's responding to it, and then we get to see, of course, Kanjiki Ashishogi Jizo. So it builds up on Ashishogi Jizo's name. Now it's Kanjiki Ashishogi Jizo. So it's the divinely cutting Jizo. And it's like this large kind of caterpillar. It's breathing out, so the facial kind of baby face motif that was on the guard of the sword, it is now here and present, breathing out that kind of noxious fume. I always really liked the design of Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo. I'm not that big of a fan of Ashisogi Jizo, the Shikai, as far as its design goes. It's fine. I like the sealed state of the sword probably more than the released Shikai. But yeah, I always love this Bankai, this kind of enormous, imposing sort of maggoty, like baby thing. Just this twisted menagerie of visuals stuck together. Really always struck me as really fitting for Mayuri, who is this person who maybe was, entirely human looking at some point, but has made himself piecemeal into some sort of like creation, and certainly Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo feels like that indeed. I always liked its like huge sort of halo and the bells that are hung from it. This big kind of metallic ring that's domed over it. I think that's maybe one of my favorite parts of its visuals, but it's got quite a bit. And I love that, Mayuri with this huge grin, his eyes all messed up. Those little cones are missing both from his chin and his other ear, and he's insisting upon how Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo makes this lethal poison from his blood in a 100-mile radius. So, I assume that Nemo is immune to it as well, that it won't kill her. But everybody else is just gonna die. So, that's pretty extreme. But we've already kind of seen how Mary doesn't really care for other people's lives. And 100-mile radius seems pretty huge, but maybe that's not even the entirety of the Seirete. Who knows? The sense of scale is a little lost. I do love this visual of Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo, who that's a whole name, of his Bankai, Mayuri's Bankai, kind of the cape that's around its shoulders flipping open, and there being about a dozen swords just jutting out of its chest. The lethality of the thing being kind of made really apparent, right? So again, there's this sort of altered aspect to it. Um, and again, like the caterpillar thing and the Jizo thing, this idea of like these kind of symbols of larval youth uh, being manipulated in such a way that like that kind of mutability of youth is being used to sort of lethal ends, I think, is certainly represents like the perverse way in which Mayuri uses science and experimentation to kind of twist things into being lethal himself, right? Um, and certainly I think the idea of like there is this idea of like stem cell research, right? Of tying kind of infancy to mutability, to something that can be kind of molded and shaped and usable. And so I think that's being played with here, especially with the kind of caterpillar imagery. Plus, it's just cool. Kubo does a really good job of just making this thing absolutely like grotesque and interesting to look at. I do love this panel. This panel, like, as much as I dislike the first page of this chapter, I think this panel more than makes up for it, right? Um, and like, I wonder if the sort of mist that Ashisogi Jizo was constantly spinning had to do with the paralysis, or if it was a poison tied to more of the poison that the Bankai is capable of. But certainly, it seems like the Bankai is a further extension of his Shikai, right? It's a bigger sort of mode. But moreover than that, I think the Shikai is kind of meant for a a kind of very localized battle, right? A one-on-one sort of situation, or maybe against a small group, where you can paralyze them with your sword, and then Mayuri can continue to sort of torture them or take whatever advantage of them that he wants. Whereas the Bankai is this sort of killing machine that Mayuri really is, right? This indiscriminate, sort of monstrous kind of form. And so I like that it mirrors that, right? That while the Shikai certainly speaks towards the induction of Mayuri's introduction to people that he is interested in experimenting on or enemies of his Bankai really represents the far-reaching consequences of his dubious kind of morality. And I say dubious, I mean he's just straight up unethical and murdering, doing a whole genocide, right? So it's like, well, how do you show genocide, or self-righteous even genocide, right? Um, as a creature. Well, yeah, there's worse kind of images you could land on than Kanjiki Ashisogi Jizo. So yeah, it's kind of grotesque and interesting, and I love Big Caterpillar Baby. I really like that Kubo really commits to this angle. I love that he says, you never make a fit research subject, which is interesting. You have to wonder if perhaps Mayuri's just kind of saying that to ultimately degrade Uryu, or perhaps Uryu wouldn't make a fit research subject because he's so abnormal. He's not really representative of the Quincy whole, right? He is a once in a generation sort of genius. Um, of course, Uryu forms a much more powerful arrow here, and you can tell by there being, while it's not the kind of blips of light that it was before, it seems like a lot more reishi is being drawn from the wing here to form this particular arrow. Of course, Mayuri has his Bankai charge forward, and I really love this kind of visual where the Bankai even has a sword in one hand. Like, come on, you have a chest full of them, but he has this sort of monstrous thing bear down on Uryu. I think it's one of the most striking sort of visuals that we've gotten in the manga so far, certainly of any of the battles, is this sort of huge monstrous form bearing down on Uryu, who calm and confidently draws his bow and fires right through its chest. Um, it's I love the kind of the real close zoom in. I really like the paneling here where we get, the Bankai rushing, from left to right towards Uryu's close in on his face, his steady concentration, and then beneath him we get where he would be holding the arrow and then loosing it, and we even get to see like this really interesting, this little filigree that's on it. It kind of gives it this sense of being more relic than actual kind of functionality. I like that it has this sort of almost like a divine sort of nature to it. I think it heightens the sense of Quincy as having this kind of holy uh, sort of lineage to them or something, or kind of an aesthetic that certainly feels that way. The final sort of like massive explosion here. I wish there was a little bit more to it. I mean, like, I do like that we get a sort of idea of the sense of scale. We zoom out, we sort of see this large explosion. Though it does leave me kind of wanting for more. Um, but we'll have to wait till next chapter to see the after effect of this clash between Bankai and the peak of Uryu's Quincy ability, right? Yeah, we get a little bit of extra with Khan, kicking a pebble to a distant galaxy. We know Khan's got very good kicks, right? So I like that does come up again here in this little Omake bit. But he senses somebody staring his way. Who could it be, right? Maybe we'll find out that in the next chapter too. Anyway, all in all, I really do like this chapter a lot. As many misgivings as I have for the way in which the Sunray Glove, gets kind of exposited at us rather than just shown to us. I feel like it would have maybe even had more allure and mystique had we not gotten all of this front ending of what it does, and we're just shown this kind of immense power that Uryu's been keeping secret to this point, and sort of cultivating. I think that would be very cool. I think it does. It's worth bearing. Like, I'm glad that it gets said that this would put him at his peak of his powers. So, since again, there's people that are always concerned with the power scaling and always want to say Bleach is very inconsistent and so on and so forth. It's like, no, like Uryu was put, beyond like the limit of his powers here, and he's able to deal with like a captain class enemy like Mayuri, despite not having adequate sort of training to be on par with him in that regard. And we even see how Uryu's technique isn't good enough to overcome Mayuri, and he ultimately can't even handle like Nemu getting involved. But whenever he has that extra power and speed, he's able, even with his technique that didn't work before, to just blitz Mayuri to overcome it in speed and power, right? So I do like that kind of aspect of it, that we're shown those elements and that we are told, like, yes, explicitly, this is the peak of his power, rather than something that he could ever return to. But again, I think most of that can be shown to us, especially him losing his powers. I think you could make for a very striking visual with that, and perhaps even an exchange between Uryu and whoever else happens upon him. Perhaps if he returns to talking to Orihime, he can, you know, kind of have to. She would have to kind of take care of him rather than him protecting her. Could make for an interesting dynamic, but yeah. Nevertheless, I feel like something's a little lost by front-ending all of that. What you do gain, again, is that it becomes much more explicit for the average reader, which is maybe what you need. The other big thing is that you then kind of make the decision that Uryu is making really clear to the reader as well, right? You've announced, well, he's made the decision to trade all of this power for the loss of his Quincy abilities, and we know how much identifying as a Quincy and having these abilities means to Uryu. So, he's kind of giving up this very proud lineage of his in a way, or at least the way that he expresses this lineage through his technique and skill. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of bit. You always have to think about with a narrative what you get your affordances and constraints, right? What you get out of choosing to do something one way over another. Because I think a lot of people will focus on, well, it would have been better this way, or that. And it's like, well, what do you lose whenever you do it that different way? What function does it have in the narrative whenever done like this? I will say, the big thing that really bothers me about this is less so, the front ending of this and showing, telling rather than showing. But really, the fact that it leans so heavily on that at the very beginning of this chapter, that there's so much text that we don't really get visuals for a whole page. That sort of thing bothers me. And that's really what I don't like to see in manga. So yeah, less of that, the better. And I think the rest of this chapter, more than well makes up for it. I think it has a lot of dynamicy and really, really great moments, and ends up landing as like one of my favorite chapters of this stretch as a whole. Despite having some of the highest and lowest lows between this first page and some of the other pages, and indeed just panels alone. But that's all that I had to say for this one. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. How do you feel about the first Bankai that we see in the Bleach manga? Do you like Mayuri's Bankai? Do you think it's kind of interesting? Do you have any ideas about its, design? Do you have any insights that you might want to share? Please do let me know. Again, anything spoilers, make sure to give under tags. And speaking of spoilers, let us get to the rest of the video where we will be discussing exactly that, how this connects to the rest of the manga, and some spoilers. So yeah, I do like that the Samurai Glove, of course, gets echoed later on in the Quincy that use, of course, their own sort of gloves, and they use those as a part of their, or at least Kyugate OP does, but the Volstan dig, right? That there's like that whole kind of, there at least is a gloved release there, and the Samurai Glove is really seen as kind of primitive to the Quincy, and it's interesting that you know you have to wonder, like, because I think that's what gets explored, right? That's what gets mentioned, is that that Soken kind of went, like, refused to kind of adapt with the times and wanted to stick to his own way of going about things and the Sanrei glove and all of that, despite it being kind of inferior. And I wonder if Soken ultimately did that because he wanted to have this idea of fragile power rather than full authoritative power that owes itself to Yuha, right? Because ultimately, like, using the Volstin dig and having the Shrift and all of that, I think kind of makes your power a little dependent on Yuha in a way that I don't know that the Soundray Glove really does, but I could be wrong. Yeah, let me know your takes on that. you know, uh, it is certainly something kind of curious, and I wonder how people interpret the whole Sunray Glove situation whenever it comes to Thousand Year Blood War. We've already kind of been over the idea of him losing his powers. We've talked about how that ends up kind of echoed throughout. Um, you know, again, we would see this sort of absorption of Reishi revisited with Kyoke OP. Interesting here that that Uryu has this all drawn into his wing. That's kind of a part of this power absorption, Reishi absorption thing. And later that gets interpreted as like the kind of Reishi crown that that Kurge has. I wish that we had seen more Quincy kind of make use of this. The idea is like right, so the Soul Society is entirely made up of Reishi, and you could really do some interesting things there with characters that use Reishi as their powers. I just I really thought it would have been really cool to see like a Quincy just take like a random grunt Shinigami and turn him into an arrow, like I think that would have been hardcore, right? Just like to completely unmake all the bonds of his Reishi and then make that dude into an arrow that he shoot. Like that would be so cool. That'd be hardcore, right? Um I mean, I think the kind of most explicit thing that we get is like Piskiel and kind of tearing away at the Reishi of people's Kanpaku and Hueco Mundo, which Hueco Mundo I think there is already a little bit more Reishi dense than the other realms. So, makes sense that maybe it's a little bit more powerful there too. I don't know. I don't know. Of course, yeah, this idea of exceeding human limits is really cool because, as we come to find out, yes, there are limits to each different faction's powers, right? That a Soul Reaper can only kind of become so strong before they hit certain limits, and humans are certainly the same case, and so I guess there's an upper limit for Quincy. Now, as we do learn, that kind of upper limit can be transcended whenever Yuha, who is essentially like a Soul King candidate, gets involved and gives people shrifts, and the whole kind of Let's Steal gets brought in. The limits get transcended beyond the all that because they're literally borrowing, and building upon the reishi of a fourth dimensional being, or however you want to present that. But the idea that Yawak has arguably the same sort of multiple, like the same sort of transcendent sort of power that Ichigo lands on by the end of the series, right? Um, which I think as much as people will begrudge Ichigo for having all the powers of all the races, that's like literally by design. Like I always feel like people kind of miss the forest for the trees with that one, right? They're always like, oh, of course Ichigo just happens to be a Quincy because he's fighting Quincy's, and he happens to get hollow powers when he's fighting hollows. And it's like, dog, like this is a part of the narrative that two super geniuses manufactured this boy to have these powers intentionally, and that has narrative consequence. Like, that's the whole point, right? It's not like, and again, look at contemporaries, it's not like Naruto, where in Naruto it's made very clear that early themes are like, you're the underdog, and even though you're not born special, you can still work really hard and fight all of these natural geniuses, and then later on it just so happens that Naruto is the incarnation of Ninja Jesus, and he is, this perfect bloodline of sealing powers, and he has the most powerful of all the Tell Beast. Of course, it was the most powerful one, but only the one half that's sealed inside of him. But now, of course, he gets to meet his dad and get the other half, and like all this, like so much stuff that's just like happens to kind of align for him to make him more special, and all of that, and it doesn't feel as though it was an intentional part of the design of the early manga, as a lot of those sort of plots don't really start to rear their heads until like hundreds of chapters in, whereas in this it's not explicitly clear that Masaki is a Quincy. I think you can maybe determine that Ishin is a Shiba, or that Ishin at least was a Shinigami by this point. I think if you're paying attention, you can maybe pick up on a couple of connections that make that clear enough. Certainly, the whole Kaien connection, which hasn't been all but explicitly stated, right? That somehow Ichigo has a connection there, and certainly makes sense if it was through his father. But as far as the Quincy power stuff goes, we get a lot of that with Old Man Zangetsu. There's a lot of oddity there if you start to really consider the nuances of the way in which Ichigo is wielding and gaining his powers. But furthermore, as you continue to consider it, you can realize that Urahara is like early as like what, chapter like 65, is intentionally killing Ichigo to make him like go through holification so that he can become a Vizard, right? So like, yeah, miss me with that shit. Like, and like the whole idea of like the conspiracy with Rukia and Aizen trying to manipulate things so that Hogekio ends up near Ichigo, and that Ichigo specifically kind of gets involved. As far as much as Aizen having Ichigo himself involved, that does feel like it's kind of added a little bit later, right, to make Aizen feel like he has maybe a little bit more of a personal connection to Ichigo. But, given how deeply Urahara is involved from the get-go, I'm more willing to buy it, right? Like, I still have my hand on the engagement button there. Anyway, point is to all of this is that the idea of the limits of different races is brought up here, and so it's interesting to see that already here we are explicitly, told how Quincy can go beyond their limits by using this sort of, let's still basically the same sort of thing that the Quincy would later use to overcome the captains in their invasion. Otherwise, I don't know that I really have any other notes. Still have no idea what Mayuri was planning to do with that weird, double piece prodder that he had. Maybe he was just going to give Uryu the shocker. I'm not sure. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I think the one other kind of thing I want to talk about is for Ashisogi Jizo for the Bankai here. The idea of the poison made out of Mayuri's blood and won't hurt him, I think, is a fantastic sort of indicator of the customization nature, right? That he says this is a lethal poison made from his blood, right? And that it won't hurt him, and so the idea that like it's like, oh, he has the power to make a poison that won't hurt me, but like there's like this idea that it's synthesized this, that Mayuri's made this by design. And as we find, Mayuri kind of has a designer Bankai, as we come to discover down the road, which I think is kind of hinted at plenty here with the idea of this sort of asymmetric poison made from Mayuri's own blood. Yeah, it's also interesting to see like blood worked into the use of a weapon to kind of enhance its abilities or to give it other abilities. I think that does come up at least once. I mean, obviously, Retsu is one to think about whenever you think about blood and her relation to an ability. Um, Interestingly enough, like the idea that he's made this poison out of his own blood, that he's kind of reworked it and he's reworked his Bankai, makes for an interesting connection to, of course, Kisuke, right? And Benihime having these sort of blood red shields and strikes, but moreover, Benihime's ability to restructure things and to restructure Kisuke himself. So it's interesting that, like, Mayuri is so much, he creates this external experiment that he's, literally poured himself into, to make into the perfect kind of entity to handle his problems. And in Kisuke, he's able to retool himself into the entity that he needs to handle his problems, right? Um, Ultimately, Kisuke does that over the course of the series with Ichigo as well. But his Bankai explicitly kind of restructures things, but Kisuke himself kind of explicitly. So it's an interesting kind of parallel with blood being kind of involved in the two of them. I believe, off the top of my head, are the ones that I remember kind of involving blood. I think Ikaku's just needs a trading of blows. I don't think bloodshed is explicit for Ikaku's to power up his Bankai. I know Hanataro's needs to, like, it heals wounds, but essentially absorbs the kind of cutting edge of those, which is kind of interesting. I don't know that, it's the idea of bloodshed is there. But I think most explicitly is probably even Ishin's Shikai and how he can, like, spit his blood to enhance the flames, right? So yeah, kind of interesting that that's tied to more than just Mayuri's, but the blood is kind of this reagent that allows modification, perhaps, or enhancement of the power, and again speaks towards the idea of these powers being intrinsically tied to the individual and kind of having a fragility, right? You can offer up your own blood to make it more powerful, right? Isn't that like the ultimate sort of sacrificing for power? So I think that's kind of cool that that's an element that is consistent through a lot of the different weapons we'll see, but certainly for a lot of Bankai, right? Um, yeah, yeah, that's it. That's all I got for this chapter, folks. I'll leave it on that one. Very cool. Well, that's a cool panel too, but you know, bring it back to that one panel that I really like. But otherwise, yeah, that's all that I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please do give a like if you managed to get to the end of this. If you have any thoughts on anything that you noticed, any sort of moments that connect to the rest of the manga that you'd like to talk about, please do let me know. Um, I don't think I really have any connection to the rest of Mayuri's fights, right? Because he fights Zalaporo, and later on we would see him do battle with Pernida, right? Ponkerjaws, I think, and in both of those cases, there's a little bit more kind of going on that doesn't explicitly kind of tie into this battle beyond what I've already said. But if there are other connections that you want to draw between either Uryu or Mayuri's fights or any other moment in the manga, please do let me know in the comments. Make sure to mark it appropriately as a spoiler so that you don't spoil anybody that happens to be kind of reading this for the first time or hasn't read all of the manga quite yet. Um, yeah. Hope you enjoyed this one. I like this chapter plenty fine, and I enjoyed getting to read it and talk about it with you. So that's all I have for this one. As always, if you do want to support the channel a little bit more, one more thing that you can always do is support me on Patreon. If you do so, not only will your money be going directly to improving the technology that I use to produce this show, but it also really just makes me happy. And you also get to see your name here in the end credits and get a huge thank you from me on every episode of this. So thank you very much for those of you that do support. I really do appreciate it. And that's all. I've been Carker Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.